Anthony Peake, welcome to About Books. Good to see you. What a book! Opening the Doors of Perception, the key to cosmic awareness. And yet, this week, the news is all about Brangelina's divorce and war crimes. I mean, seriously, are we ready for cosmic awareness?
The billion-dollar question, because effectively if cosmic awareness is something that's a widening of our ability to perceive reality around us, the question is, are we evolved enough, or is it only certain individuals are going to be evolved enough? And indeed, as you probably know, in the end of the book I have a whole section on the argument that this is some form of holographic simulation. And if we're inside a holographic simulation, we are Sims within a holographic simulation, how can the Sims become aware of the fact they're inside a simulation? If they do, does that destroy the simulation?
In that case, who do you see as the audience being for your book?
Everybody. Anybody who has lain awake at night in those dim, dark hours and thought, what am I? You know, the existentialist crisis, the idea that I'm part of a link of the genetic chain. I haven't existed for billions of years, I exist for 50, 60, 70 years, then I cease to exist again. These are the really, really big questions, but my audience as well is anybody who's ever had an extraordinary experience, anybody who's had precognitive déjà vu, any form of peculiar dream encounter, anybody who has had an out-of-the-body experience, a near-death experience. These are my major audience. These are the people who I'm trying to explain, or attempting to explain, what takes place here. But I don't do the gee whiz, let's have a whole series of anecdotes and roll people in to say, this happened to me. I don't do that. I do the science, so I go into the neurology, I go into the neurochemistry, I go into the history, I go into the sociology even in terms of these experiences, because we need to understand what's happening here, and the only way we can really understand is to do the science. We can talk about experiences till the cows come home, but they're just, you know, there's an old statement that says the plural of anecdote is not proof, and that's very much the case with this. I give the proof and I say to my readers, right, okay, read the book, follow up the references, follow up everything that's in it, and then make up your own mind. Because that's the most important thing, for me anyway. Because this is part of my journey, this is my 9th book.
I was going to say, what are the origins of your writing this book? How did this come about?
It's been developing for, well, it's probably been developing since I was about 10 or 11 years of age. I mean, I used to come into this library many, many years ago, you know, the sort of late 60s, early 70s, and read books here. And I've always been fascinated by altered states of consciousness. And the reason being that when I was, way back in 1966, I had double pneumonia. And I had a series of quite powerful hallucinations during that period. And it made me fascinated by what exactly is happening. When I hallucinate something, or when I have a sensation or a strange sensation or a strange feeling, what is this really telling me about the nature of reality? So I started reading, there was a part work called Man, Myth and Magic.
I remember it well.
Okay.
Yes.
So it was Cavendish, I think it was to do. And I bought all of those and I read them all from cover to cover. Then we had a series called The Unexplained, which came out. And it gave me a very, very wide interest in the nature of religion, religious beliefs, and religious backgrounds as well. So when I had the opportunity to go to university, I decided I would do a degree in sociology and history. And sociology, I very much focused on the sociology of belief, and the sociology of religion, and indeed the sociology of language, because I was interested also in communication. So how we communicate, how language, how we mould words and everything else as well. And then I got my degree, then I did postgrad, and my postgrad course was in management studies. So effectively, I was in a position...
How does that happen? You've got all these interests, all these very natural interests, coming at you from a very early age.
Practicality.
And suddenly,
practicality.
Suddenly you're going into management?
Well, practicality, because effectively, you know, as a working class Scouser, you know,
right.
The world isn't necessarily your oyster, and it wasn't necessarily in those days. And yes, I would have loved to have actually had an academic career, and I'm in negotiations at the moment about doing a PhD on the back of this book. But in those days, I mean, I was offered a postgraduate grant to do a course in art history. But effectively, the powers that be said to me, look, really, we need people in HR management. We don't need art historians. We don't need ideas people. And to be completely honest, you know, you can become an academic and your career could be over very, very quickly. If you don't get tenure, you don't get a university place. Whereas if you have a management qualification and professional qualifications, you can then build a career, which is what I did for, what, 30 odd years. And it was, I did a contract over in Poland, and I'd earned sufficient money to take a year out. And I thought, you know what I'd really love to do? I'm going to write a book. And this is a really true story. I said, I'm going to write a book. What am I going to write it about? And the first day, I had the computer screen in front of me. You know, that kind of, all writers will know this, that start of the book. And I didn't have a clue what I was going to write about, but I knew it was going to be to do something with consciousness, something to do with the consciousness-reality interface. And I was staring at the computer screen, and then suddenly something curious started to happen. I realised immediately what was happening, and this relates to this book. I started, the tips of my fingers started to tingle, and my lips started to tingle. And I realised I was moving into the aura state of a migraine, because I have classic migraine. And I knew what was going to happen next was going to be the breakdown of my visual field, because you get what's called a scotoma, which anybody who actually has classic migraine will know this. It's like a kind of a jagged shape that's in your visual field. And it gets bigger and bigger, and you lose your ability to see properly. But what was most peculiar was, I sensed that I had sat staring in front of that TV screen, having a migraine experience many times before. It was a most alarming déjà vu sensation I've ever had. And when I came out of the aura state, I realised that's what the book needed to be about. It needed to be an explanation of déjà vu. So I started reading up about déjà vu, and I was discovered to find that 70% of humanity will, at least one stage in their life, experience a déjà vu sensation. And of course, the déjà vu sensation is that feeling that you have perceived this moment before. At some unknown period in your past, you have experienced this. So I started reading up about déjà vu, and I came across the work of various writers. There's a guy called Vernon Neppe, who is a professor of psychiatry over in Seattle. And he was the guy that's come up with the definition of déjà vu, which is basically a sensation of recognition of something that's happened to you sometime in your past. And then I came across the work of somebody called Dr. Arthur Funkhauser, who's now become a really good friend of mine. And Art Funkhauser wrote a series of papers in the 90s on déjà vu. And he came up with what was called the dream theory of déjà vu. And this is intriguing because what it's suggesting is that you have had a dream in the past that you have forgotten. Like, we forget our dreams all the time. And you've had a dream in your past, and you start to live it in three-dimensional consensual reality. You start to live the dream, and you have this subtle recognition because you're remembering a dream. And I met Art in Switzerland a few years ago, and I did say to him, you're a quantum physicist, which he is by background. He's a Jungian psychologist, a Jungian analyst, but he's also a quantum physicist. He's an expert in holograms and holographics. And I said to him, you have a problem here, because if your explanation for the déjà vu is that somebody has had a dream beforehand and they're living it, that suggests precognition. The only way you can possibly have a dream of an event that hasn't taken place yet is precognition. There is no other argument for that. So I developed the book, and then I found 2 or 3 intriguing things. One of the intriguing things is that the déjà vu sensation is a known part of the aura state of migraine. It's also a known part of the aura state of temporal lobe epilepsy. So people who experience temporal lobe epilepsy, one of the prodromes, one of the ways in which somebody can define that somebody has temporal lobe epilepsy, is they will say, before you have your seizure, when you go into your aura state, do you have a great feeling of recognition of your environment around you? And I then was amazed to discover that the neurochemicals that are involved in migraine and the neurochemicals that are involved in temporal lobe epilepsy, and to a degree schizophrenia, are also related to something else that is very regularly recorded, which is called the near-death experience. So there is a direct link between the near-death experience and temporal lobe epilepsy and migraine. They're all triggered by the same neurochemicals. Initially my argument was it's a neurochemical called glutamate. Now again, if anybody knows about the near-death experience, it's when individuals have a heart attack, cardiac arrest, they're in a car crash, or they fall from a great height. And when they do so, they have a series of things that happen to them. They're actually called the Grayson typologies by Professor Bruce Grayson. The University of Virginia did a lot of work on this. And the Grayson typologies, there are things that you have a sensation of floating outside your body, so you have an out-of-body experience. The feeling that time slows down, that suddenly time, and if anybody's ever been involved in an accident or a car crash, you know that sensation where time just suddenly goes. And everybody experiences this. This is the glutamate being released in the brain because of the stress. The other thing that people say is, and it is one of the most famous typologies, is something called a panoramic life review. You ever heard of people say, my life flashed before my eyes? I saw every single incident of my life from the moment of my birth to the moment of my death, or I was back at particular points in my life. Now I started looking at this and I was saying, well, if that happens, this suggests that either the brain records everything in our lives, because if in your life you can suddenly recall the whole of your life, that means that your life has been recorded in some way, that your brain has encoded somewhere every single incident in your life. So I started looking into this and I found that particularly temporal lobe epileptics have what's called charged memories, whereby during a seizure they'll flash back to a point in their past where they're back there, they're really existing in that environment. Which leads me to believe that the brain in some way either records or downloads or uploads from somewhere else your life, and you can relive it at the final seconds of your life. But remember, time dilates at that point of death. So when you're having a near-death experience, what for you could be a whole lifetime would be to an observer watching you die a split second. So imagine a scenario that in a near-death experience, you start to live your life again in a split second. And at the end of that second life, you live it again and again and again. It's like Groundhog Day. And during those times, you sometimes realise that you've lived this before. And I argue that 70% of people who have déjà vu experiences are actually living their lives again. In some format, they are living their lives again. Because in my book, Is There Life After Death? The Extraordinary Science of What Happens When We Die, this puts forward this suggestion of what happens when we die. And I call it cheating the ferryman. But there were elements of cheating the ferryman that really didn't hang true for me. The idea that in some way the brain itself generates consciousness, which the implication was in my initial hypothesis, doesn't really fit in with certain experiences that people have. It doesn't fit in with out-of-body experiences, distance viewing, this kind of thing.
You mentioning the brain, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Is that where everything comes from, our perception of everything? I mean, is the brain to blame? And is it, when can we blame it? Do we suddenly start thinking in a way because of our upbringing or because of the education system?
I think the problem is that we confuse what the brain does. We assume that the brain creates consciousness, that somehow what in effect is inanimate matter, molecules and electrons and neutrons and everything else and the nucleus of the atom somehow come together in large numbers and magically at one point suddenly creates you or me, and suddenly creates this feeling of a something that is embodied within the mind that is viewing an existence outside. Now, I'm sorry, it doesn't work for me because effectively it can't. In other words, is there the addition of one molecule and suddenly the brain becomes self-aware?
Is the mind and the brain connected? Is it the same thing?
I argue.
Or are the universes within the brain? I mean, I've spoken with a few brain surgeons in my time, and perhaps the most honest of them said, he hasn't got a clue.
Correct. I've spoken to neurosurgeons over the years and experts in various areas of neurology. And the ones that are genuinely honest will say, we haven't got a clue how the brain generates consciousness. And in fact, in 1994, at a conference at the University of Arizona, a young Australian philosopher by the name of David Chalmers stood up and addressed the audience and said, look guys, we're a conscience on consciousness, but we don't understand consciousness. We can do the soft problem of consciousness, which is how the brain works, how the neurochemicals work, how the neurons work, how the neurons communicate, how the synapses work and everything else. But we can never understand how consciousness becomes in the brain, how it happens. And he called that the hard problem of science. And this is the hard problem of science. And any scientist that says they understand consciousness, they will argue, I can take a PET scan and I can make you think of something, and certain parts of the brain fire up. This is confusing the map with the territory. All it's doing is it's showing, I can take the back off an old valve radio and I can see where the lights come on when you switch it on. It doesn't mean that the orchestra or the studio are in those valves. It's like taking apart a motorbike to discover speed. They're looking for the wrong thing. The brain is an attenuator. The brain is something that receives consciousness. It downloads consciousness from somewhere else. The reason that later science is saying this is because there's something called the binding problem. And the binding problem is, for instance, if you see a red bouncing ball bouncing down the street, the movement of the ball is being processed in one part of your brain, in your visual cortex down here somewhere. The colour is being processed somewhere else in your brain, and there are other elements that are being processed in different parts of the brain. But you have a feeling of simultaneity. You just see a red bouncing ball, which means that either the brain works non-locally, in other words, it has instantaneous communication across it, or there's something not quite right with it. And the argument is that, and I suggest this in the book, the new book, the brain works non-locally. Non-locality is something that's known in quantum physics. It's a known effect in quantum physics. It has been since 1981 when Dalibard and Aspect did an experiment at the University of Paris, where they found subatomic particles. You do something to one subatomic particle, and once they've been entangled, another one reacts instantaneously, however far apart they are. They could be the other sides of the universe, which means instantaneous contact. Now that contravenes what Einstein said about no information can travel faster than the speed of light. Well, it does with subatomic particles, and they don't know why. And this is how they think the brain works. It works holographically.
There's a quote in the book that I like: if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is. And that's from William Blake. The year is 2016. We've had a while to open those doors. Will it happen?
Yes. Yes, most definitely. It happens all the time. In the book, I discuss something I call the Huxleyan spectrum. And the reason I call it the Huxleyan spectrum is the Doors of Perception, the book, written in 1954, written by Aldous Huxley, the British writer. And what happened was Aldous Huxley had heard of a series of experiments being done by a guy called Humphrey Osmond, who was a British psychiatrist in Saskatchewan. I was quite amazed to discover this. The largest building in the British Empire in the 1950s was a psychiatric unit in southern Saskatchewan. It was this huge building. And he worked there, and he used to work with recovering alcoholics and schizophrenics. And he found that schizophrenics, their doors of perception are wide open. Their perception is so wide it drives them crazy, because they see things that we can't see. They see hallucinations we can't see. Osmond believed that you needed to actually try to bring down their perceptions. And the way his idea was, and it's a brilliant one, give them hallucinogenic substances. Give them peyote, give them mescaline, because they're seeing a massive amount of the reality. By giving them a psychedelic substance, you'll actually bring down what they see. And they were successful. Huxley heard about this and contacted Osmond and said, you know what, I'd really like to try this stuff. So Osmond came down to Huxley's place in California and brought down 0.4 of a milligram of mescaline. And he took it. And the book, The Doors of Perception, was his description of the experiences he had using mescaline. And he came to the conclusion that the brain is an attenuator. And this is where he uses and paraphrases William Blake from the Songs of Innocence, where he says, because William Blake himself believed, because of course Blake was a very, very strange character, he saw angels in trees and everything else. So Blake's doors of perception were wide open as well. So what we have here is Aldous Huxley writing a book about it, and of course that became de rigueur in the 1960s. Of course, in the big generation, everybody else were all reading Aldous Huxley, and of course Jim Morrison comes along and names his band after them, after the Doors of Perception. But I argue in the book that 1954, the knowledge we had of the true nature of the universe, the knowledge we had of the neurological constructs of the brain, what we knew about neurochemistry, was comparatively limited. Here we are in 2016, where suddenly we can scan the brain, we know neurochemicals, and we now know things that we didn't know. For instance, The discovery of dimethyltryptamine in the pineal gland of the human brain, which was discovered 3 years ago by a lady called Jimo Borogin at the University of Michigan. This should have been headlines around the world. You read in the web, they'll turn around and say, DMT, which is the strongest, most powerful hallucinogenic substance known to man, has been found in the lining of the stomach. It's been found in the cerebral fluid, but it's never been found in the brain. Borogin found it in the pineal gland of live rats. They also found things called the sigma-1 receptors and the TARS receptors, trace amine-associated receptors in the brain. These are designed to work with dimethyltryptamine, which means dimethyltryptamine is a neurotransmitter. We have evolved in order to create dimethyltryptamine in our brains.
So should we be on acid rather than Prozac?
Acid less so. Dimethyltryptamine is anybody. I have never used the substance, and it is important to stress it is an illegal substance. In certain parts of the world it isn't, but it is an illegal substance in the UK and the USA and various other places. But people go down to Latin America and they have the most extraordinary experiences. For instance, in the early 1990s, a guy called Dr. Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico was given a grant by the American government to test with volunteers DMT. Now, what is really creepy is that most people, when they took DMT, had experiences so powerful. When they came back, they said, "This is the dream. Where I have just been with DMT is the real place. The doors of perception are opened by DMT and people go somewhere else." But what was very, very uncanny, and this is where my next book, which I'm working on at the moment, is going to be about, is that a lot of his people that took DMT experienced aliens, experienced greys, experienced beings with huge black eyes. They were experimented on in these circumstances, which very much is very much the tropes and the things that you have in abduction. This is why this book, the introductory article in it, is written by Whitley Strieber. I don't know if you know Whitley Strieber at all?
Only from reading your book.
Okay. Whitley Strieber was the guy that wrote Wolfen. He wrote The Day After Tomorrow, hugely The Hunger with David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve, really popular movie. Strieber wrote a lot of horror movies, and he owned a cabin in upstate New York. And one evening, aliens abducted him, so he claimed. But he never fully understood what was going on, and he realised that right through his past, these beings had been part of his life. And the book Communion, which he wrote on his experience, became a huge bestseller. Everybody, you probably know the cover. The cover is a classic grey. It's the face of a grey face on. And they made a movie on it called Communion. Christopher Walken took off Whitley Strieber. Strieber interviewed me on his American TV program around about 18 months ago. And I was talking about some of my work, and Strieber came back to me and said, "My God, you've explained my experiences. I cannot believe you have explained what has happened to me all my life." And I believe it's because when the doors of perception are opened, we go into alternate realities. For instance, I believe that DMT is the modulator of certain dream states. Hypnagogia, hypnopompia. Hypnagogia, when you are falling asleep, you see faces in profile. You see things out there in three-dimensional space. People who have sleep paralysis, where they wake up and they cannot move, and they feel something sitting on their chest, and they will see in the room a creature, normally called the hag, which is normally a cowled figure in profile. When people wake up, it's called hypnopompia. These are, again, I think, the release of DMT. Just as we go to sleep, the pineal gland releases DMT. Not only that, which is more intriguing, is the neurology of this and the physiology. At the 49th day of gestation, when the baby's in the womb, the pineal gland and the pituitary gland sit at the back of the throat. And at the 49th day of gestation, they start to move up from the back of the throat to the centre of the brain, where they split into two. The pineal gland goes in one direction, the pituitary gland goes in the other, which leaves something called Rathke's pouch, which is a tiny duct that runs at the back of the throat. Now, if DMT is released by the brain, by the pineal gland, it is logical to conclude that some DMT may leak down the Rathke pouch to the back of the throat. Now, anybody who knows about deep meditative states will know there's something called the nectar of transcendence. And this is people who claim that when they go into these very deep states, they have this taste at the back of their throat. this kind of acidic taste. In each Eastern religions, there's a technique called Kekara Mudra. And what they do is they train themselves to lift their tongue to the back of the throat so they can taste this nectar. It's a training technique that people use in India and various other areas. It's because you start to taste the hallucinogenic substance. You taste the DMT. But what is most intriguing about this is you read Tibetan Buddhism. The 49th day of gestation is powerfully important because that is the point the Buddhists believe that the soul enters the embryo. They didn't know about this. They couldn't have known about this. Or maybe they did. And maybe this is one of the great secrets. Kundalini experiences, I argue, are actually stimulated by DMT. You know, when people feel that there's sort of something firing up their spine and they feel that head explodes. The caduceus, you know the symbol of the caduceus where you have the two snakes going round, and you have, if you look at the caduceus, it's a symbol of the pineal gland and the spine. Because you have the spine going up the back and you have two snakes, which are called in the Kundalini experience called the Ida and the Pingala. And they come together and they explode in the head. And if you look at the top of the caduceus, you have two wings, and there's a little circle between the two wings, right and left hemisphere of the brain, pineal gland. This has been hidden in plain sight for millennia. There was a substance called soma.
How has it become hidden? I mean, why? Why
Because
are we hiding these simple facts, obvious facts?
There was a wonderful, there's a guy called Benny Shannon who is an Israeli psychologist, and he wrote a book called The Antipodes of the Mind around about 12 years ago, a big thick book, well worth reading. And Benny Shannon was doing research in ayahuasca. Now ayahuasca is effectively DMT. Now there's two things that's really weird about this substance, and I'll explain this if we have time. Shannon spoke to one of the ayahuasqueros. These are the guys that actually brew the DMT, or brew the ayahuasca, which is basically DMT. And the guy said to him, he said, when God created consciousness and the great secret of reality, he wanted to know where he should hide it. And he thought, shall I hide it on the moon? And he said, no, if I hide it on the moon, man will eventually find rocket ships and he'll go to the moon. Do I bury it at the bottom of the ocean? And he said, no, because they'll build submarines and they'll find it. And then he thought to himself, I'll place the biggest secret in the one place that man will never think of looking, in the centre of his own brain, because he will never think of looking there. Now, since then, I think there have been mystical groups over the centuries, and I believe the Holy Grail is in fact the pineal gland and DMT. These are things that are starting to come to be noticed now, but secret societies have known of this for years. Because they always say to you, don't they, when you go into secret society, what are you looking for? You are looking to find the God within. You're trying to find within yourself the universe. The idea that somewhere inside you is something all-powerful. And I argue that DMT is our key to the greater reality, the reality outside. Now, ayahuasca is very, very strange substance. Have I got time to talk about it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Really, really weird substance. It's made out, it's a brew, it's brewed like a tea, and they brew it overnight. And what they do is they throw in two plants. One is called Banisterius capi, and one is called Psychiatra viridas. Psychiatra viridas contains DMT. They mix the two plants together and they brew them. And when you drink it, you have the most unbelievable experience, out-the-body experiences, you name it, the most wonderful experiences. And usually when you have these experiences, you see snakes, which again is curious, which we could come back on. The weird thing is that there are around about 50,000 species of plants in the Amazon jungle. The ayahuasqueros and the shamans happen to pick two plants that work together. The reason they work together is, as I said, Psychiatra viridas contains DMT. However, if you took the leaves of the Psychiatra viridas and you ate them, and you put them in your stomach, nothing would happen. And the reason it wouldn't happen is there's something called monoamine oxidase, which is released by the lining of the stomach. And in doing so, the monoamine oxidase stops the DMT going through into the blood system, which means all you do is you fill your stomach up, and that's it. That's all that happens. However, Banisterius capi, the other plant, the vine, contains something called harmaline. And harmaline is an MAO inhibitor. So the ayahuascas and the shamans of the 50,000 plants found the 2 plants that put together would ensure that we would have these kind of experiences. When they were asked by the anthropologists, how did you do it, guys? How did you know which plants to put together? They said, the snakes told us. They said when they went shamanic travelling, they would meet snakes, and the snakes would take them in this hypnotic state and would pick the plants up and show them and say, you take this, and you take this, and you put this together, and you will find God within. Now, who are the snakes? The snakes are DNA. The snakes are symbolic of our own DNA. This is our own DNA communicating with us for us to evolve to the next level of humanity, which is post-humanism. It's the idea that we will realise that this is an illusion, that this reality is not what we think it is, and there is a much broader reality behind the reality.
You mentioned God.
Yes.
Who's that then?
God is the collective of everything. In my opinion, I've been a great student of Gnosticism for most of my life. Most of my books have themes of Gnosticism. And you know, in Gnosticism, there is a belief that this reality is a creation of the demiurge. It's the creation of the half-maker. It's the creation of a God that thinks he's God but isn't. And there's a real God behind him. Okay? And we are trapped within this creation of the demiurge. It's like the movie The Matrix. I mean, The Matrix is incredibly Gnostic. But there is an idea that there is something beyond this reality called the pleroma, the fullness. And that is the real reality. And God, for whatever God is outside in that pleroma. Now, what I suggest in the book, and it's not original, it has been suggested by other people, I've just contributed a chapter to a book on pandeism. The idea is that everything that is just an emanation of one single consciousness, which is God. And we are simply embodied bits trapped in this universe of the Godhead. And we are just part of that. And we have forgotten. We suffer from amnesis. There was something the Platonics used to talk about, which was anamnesis, which was remembering what we really are. And we live in this state of confusion because we haven't developed enough to realise exactly what we are. And what we need to do is to discover that little shard of the pleroma which is inside us. And I believe that's the pineal gland, and I think that's what opens up the doors of perception. So, in single argument, God is everything. God is the embodiment of everything. Now, you can never ever prove that. But come on, reality is really weird. Why should there be anything rather than nothing? You know, it makes no sense. Why? It is much easier to have nothing, but we don't. We have something and we exist within it. And we are conscious beings within that something. Now, if our lives are just a waste of time and we are just a link in a genetic chain, it's pointless. Why bother having us self-conscious? Why bother having us self-aware? We are self-aware because we are here to learn. And I believe we are here to learn because we live our lives over and over and over again, just like Connors does in the movie Groundhog Day, until we get it right and we live the perfect life. And then we move on to something else.
There speaks the curious child within you. And there's a quote in your book from you. The only thing I know with absolute certainty is that I am something perceiving something, which is a good start. We're born and our vision clears. Where does it start to go wrong? Or am I being pessimistic here and lead to Jeremy, Kyle and the Kardashians? I mean, that seems to be the general viewpoint today, or am I just looking in the wrong newspapers?
No, I think that...
Are we getting nearer or further from that door?
Well, no, I think we're getting nearer to the door, and the reason we're getting nearer to the door is because of the way in which we now understand reality to be. Around about 50 years ago, the analogy I use for my model of the way reality works would not be understood. And what I say is that imagine that your life is a first-person computer game. Okay? Imagine the scenario that your life is a computer game that runs, and I do the science of this, I think, it runs on something called the zero-point field. And again, I do the quantum physics of this, so there's nothing I say in my book, it doesn't go back to science. Okay? Something called the zero-point field, which is supposed to be the ground space state of everything. Okay. It's a form of energy that is found at absolute zero, where there should be no energy. At absolute zero, everything should stop moving. It doesn't. They're still finding energy there. So there's some form of energy field. Now, if there is an energy field and there's an informational field, what people would call the Akashic field, the Akashic record, and it contains everything. It's the hard drive that runs all this. It's what contains everything that we perceive. There is absolutely no reason to not have every outcome of every decision of your life already programmed within the program. So there you are, born in a computer program of your life that contains the outcome of everything you can have. Now, again, Stephen Hawking, 7 years ago, wrote a paper with a guy called Frank Hartle, who is a physicist at CERN, and it's called the top-down hypothesis of quantum physics. And Stephen Hawking argued that everything that can happen does happen, and can happen. It's already encoded in there. Again, going into quantum physics, you probably know that the act of observation, the act of measurement, collapses what's called a wave function. In other words, a subatomic particle does not exist until it is measured. Before it is measured, it is a wave of probability. It is a probability that it might be found here, there, or anywhere. When it's observed, it collapses its wave function to a point particle, which means that observation, measurement stroke observation, creates three-dimensional reality we exist within. Without an observer, there is no reality. Okay? Because this is how subatomic particles behave. This is why Schrodinger's cat is such a famous thought experiment. It's reducing this idea of the conscious observer creating reality. So, if every potential can be created by you observing it, it means that every action you take collapses the reality module of that decision to accommodate the decision you've just made. Like, I might decide now, I've had enough of this interview, I'm going to stand up and walk off in that direction. As I do that, the probability wave of that reality comes into existence to accommodate the fact I've just done that. There's also a reality that accommodates I stay here, and I stay here, and I sit here. Which means that everything is out there. Now, if anybody has played computer games, you'll know that when you play it, you start off and you have your on-screen sprite, say Lara Croft, bang, Tomb Raider. She runs down a corridor, you don't know where you're going because you've never played the game before. Run down the corridor, go into a room, big monster comes out and kills her. Lara's dead. She's dead, she's gone. She doesn't know anymore. Bang, you think as a game player, I'm going to play the game again now, but I know there's a monster in that room, so you start the game again, bing, Lara Croft, she's alive again. She's born again. She doesn't remember her last life. She goes running down the corridor and suddenly she gets this urge not to go in that room. Because the game player is telling her not to. So she goes down another corridor, gets eaten by another monster. That's how life works. There's part of you that knows that you've lived this life before, and I call this the daemon. Okay? The on-screen sprite is called your eidolon, and your eidolon is you in the game. This is your normal ego. Within the game, which has no knowledge, you live inside time, you have no knowledge of anything other than the fact that you're living, and the memories you have of that life. The daemon, on the other hand, your shard of the pleroma, you're part of the greater something, knows you've lived this life before and uses this information to help you get through your life this time. And the daemon, over many, many iterations, will live the perfect life. And this is in the bardo state. Again, you know, from Buddhism, there's the idea that when you die, there is this timeless state that you go to, which you know, within Catholicism is known as purgatory or something like that. It's the kind of the in-between state, the liminal state, the borderland, before you die, or when your soul is still imminent. Then, in that time, you fulfill every potential of your life. Now again, if anybody's seen the movie Groundhog Day, you know that this is what Connors does. Connors in that movie, if you remember, I've interviewed the guy who wrote it. It's a guy called Danny Rubin, who's a lecturer at Harvard. Rubin gave my first book to all his mates at Harvard. He said, this guy's done the science of Groundhog Day. Okay? He gives that day over and over again. Do you remember? He does all the selfish things at first, doesn't he? You know, he wants to bed the girl, he wants to use all to his own advantage. Then he starts to realise he can learn more, so he learns how to play the piano and he teaches himself foreign languages over all these lives. But in the end, what he starts doing, he's doing good for good's sake. He makes sure that he's underneath the tree when the kid falls out and he catches him. He makes sure that he helps the old lady across the road. He tries to save the tramp. He starts to do good for doing good's sake. So what he's done is, over a period of lives, he's lived the perfect life. He has become a saint for want of a better term, where he's lived a life where he's done good for doing good's sake. And he does that by realising that everybody he interfaces with, well, it's only implied in the book, but I argue this, that every single human being you interface is you. It's part of you. So if you torture somebody, that's you. You're killing yourself, you're torturing yourself, it will come back on you. It's only when you realise that other human beings live lives and you empathise with other human beings that you start to live the perfect life. And then you get to the end and then you move on. Who has designed this game? Ourselves. There's arguments to say that the simulation that we're existing in, and again this is hard science, they've actually found the pixelation of this reality.
Because once upon a time there was nothing.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. How is it, if you talk to cosmologists, they will argue that the universe came from a point of nothingness and something called hyperinflation took place, so that in the billionth of a second it expanded out to something the size of a tennis ball, contradicting every logical thing you can imagine. Nothing, nothing, then something. If everything is digital information, however, if everything that we perceive around us is in fact digital, digital is non-physical. Numbers are non-physical, maths is non-physical. Therefore, what we assume is solid is not solid. That table is not solid. My hands are never touching that table as I hit it. What I'm touching is the fields around the subatomic particles. I'm never in contact with reality, ever. And it's because it's not there in the same way. No. He's mad, isn't he? This guy's wild.
It rings so many bells through my life. Can I take you back to hallucinations? And,
yes.
It's a personal reason, really, because many years ago my wife had a brain operation, and certainly over the last decade she has nightly visitors, and these nightly visitors seem to be historic, from all sorts of different periods. What's going on? What's been released?
She's the nightly visitors. She's again what at the state I argued before called hypnagogia, and hypnagogia is a liminal state whereby the DMT is released, but you're asleep. But what happens is the reality, it's called again REM intrusion as well. The idea that the three-dimensional consensual reality we all agree is out there is superimposed by elements from the pleroma, elements from the information field, and they can be perceived in three-dimensional reality. Okay? Now this is a known phenomenon, it happens an awful lot. The amount of people who have approached me from around the world after reading my books to say, I have these experiences where I see things, I have these experiences where in my sleep state I go somewhere else, I can visit other people, I can see other people in their house, this kind of thing. Clearly there is something powerful going on here. Now, hallucinations themselves, you start to ask the question, which I do in my book. People will turn around and they will say, your wife, she's having hallucinations. Therefore it's explained. No, it's not. You've given it a label. It's not explained at all. All it is, you've given it, I call it the labeling theory of ignorance. So what you do is you give it a label and you explain it. And if you can give it a nice Latin label, or you can give it a Greek label, it sounds even more impressive, particularly if you have a PhD. And they'll go, wow, you've explained it. I always ask the next question. I'll say, if somebody is hallucinating, explain what an hallucination is. Oliver Sacks, in his last book before he died, Hallucinations, gave up trying to explain what hallucinations are. Because hallucinations are weird. For instance, if I imagine a gorilla standing over there, I'm having an hallucination of a gorilla, but I'm also having another hallucination, which is an hallucination by extraction. And people never realise this. If I'm seeing a gorilla there, I can't see the books behind. Which means my hallucination has taken the information out of my information field to accommodate the fact that there's a gorilla in front of it. So there's two here. And the way in which hallucinations work, the same parts of the brain light up when somebody's hallucinating, say, playing tennis, to when they do a brain scan of somebody actually playing tennis. Which means that the same stimulants are happening within the brain. Now, we create reality within the brain. The brain creates reality. What we're perceiving now is brain created. The reason you can test this, photons are bouncing off my body, are entering your eye through your aqueous humor and then getting to the retina on the back of your eye. Those photons, those little points of electromagnetic radiation, or waves of electromagnetic radiation, which they don't know, and they don't know that either. It's called wave-particle duality. Say that to a quantum physicist and he'll probably turn around and go somewhere else because he doesn't want to talk about it. So, hit your retina. The retina then changes that signal from light to an electric impulse, which goes right to the back here, the visual cortex. The image it has is postage stamped and it's inverted and it's bent. The visual cortex changes that bent little signal to this three-dimensional, in-depth, multicoloured environment. Impossible. No, it's impossible. You have at the back of both of your eyes, you have something called the blind spot. It's where the optic nerve leaves the back of the eye. There is no area there, it's blind at the back of the eye. You don't see the blind spot. We never see the blind spot. And I argued a few years ago with an ophthalmologist, when I said, you know, about this, and he said, no, that's silly. He said, the reason you don't see the blind spot is we have stereo vision, and it overlaps. And I said, that's very interesting. So that's what you were taught, were you? And I said, okay, close one eye then. And he did, and I said, so where's your blind spot now then? There's no stereo vision now, so there should be a blind spot, but there isn't, is there? And he said, no, I'd never thought of that, Matt. And I said, well, you need to. Because the brain fills in the information for you. It takes the information around the side and it says, I'm missing that bit of emission, so I'll create it. So if it can create that, it can create all this as well, in exactly the same way.
What's on the far side of the door?
The next book will be called Through the Doors of Perception, which my publishers are so excited about this book, they've already wanted to write the sequel.
Also, what happens when the human mind arrives there? Does our need for logic of some kind work against the reality?
Well, if the other side of the door is a much broader reality than the one we exist within, the way we perceive the universe will be completely different, because our perceptions will be different. Again, I use the analogy here, if anybody's watched the movie Interstellar. In Interstellar, there is a sequence called the Tesseract sequence, and it's where the astronaut sees his daughter's life from the sixth dimension. In other words, there's the three dimensions of space, then there's the one dimension of time, and then there's viewing time from outside time, and then there's the viewing everything. And if there was a way of doing that, the way the universe would be perceived would be totally different, because everything would be an instantaneous now. And everything that can happen and will be embodied in that instant, which means that everything is related to everything else, which means that everything is encoded in everything else, which means that everything is, as the great physicist David Bohm said, it's enfolded within itself. Now, if everything's enfolded, it means that everything is a singularity. And again, that singularity is God. And pantheists have been argued this for centuries, that the point of singularity, anybody knows Hicks, the famous monologue, American comedian. Bob, is it? Bill Hicks, thank you. Bill Hicks, where he turns around and he says, breaking news, it's a newscast, and he's saying, breaking news, folks, young man on LSD discovers that matter is nothing but energy slowed down to walking speed, and we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. Now to the weather. And I think that's what it is. You realise these things, but you still have to exist within this environment. But when you go through the doors of perception, you can never come back. And that's why I argue people who have extraordinary experiences can never go back. I cite the example in this book of Ibn Alexander, who was a neurosurgeon, who used to poo-poo near-death experiences. Total nonsense. He had his own near-death experience. His life has changed completely. He writes books now about near-death experiences. It's because you have to perceive it to realise it's there. And then you realise that everybody else is wandering around with 95% of their perception not working. And we know this. Come on, we've got dark matter, we've got dark energy. 94% of the universe is missing. Where is it? What is it?
Anthony, there's so much more in the book. I mean, we could talk from now till I don't know when. Conclusions. What's it all about, Alfie? Can you sum it up in a sentence?
We are one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. I wish I knew. My whole life, my writing is and the narrative of my personal search. for understanding. And my search has not ended yet, and it will not end yet. And I probably will never find the answers. And I think I will only ever find the answers the moment I die, and then I will know. But I think...
Or not.
Or not. But I think the answer lies in just, for a second, stay in that still space and look back, not in the inside, the world outside of you, but looking inside to find the inner self that is in there, and what you are, and where you're going, and what is your reason for being. Because all we do is we live within a materialist world where everything we want more, and we need more. We don't. You need, I'm more self-actualized now, again going back to Maslow, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Self-actualization, it's a level that you get to when you realize that you're above all that. Now, I'm not saying I'm a genius, because I'm not, but what I'm saying is that I feel more self-actualized now after the research I've done, and I feel more at ease with the world than I've ever done in my life. And that has given me an inner peace. And all I'd like to do with my writing is for people to approach my books with a healthy skepticism. I'm not a guru, I'm not channeling information from the planet Tharg, I'm doing the science. And the science tells me that there is something incredibly wonderful about this world we live in.
On that wonderful note, Anthony Peake, thank you. You've turned on quite a few lights. Thank you.
Thank you.